So I will say this topic, I think no one is surprised that me as a woman am the one up here talking about it, but you should be a little surprised because I actually had no interest in this topic as recent as 5 years ago. I thought, I'm a woman in investment management, I'm doing fine, why should I be worried about this topic? Clearly women can succeed. Well, the more that time has gone on, I've been in this industry for 20 years, the more I've actually seen very little change. And I'm very sad to see that. And so one thing we've undertaken at Morningstar is to actually study the topic and really understand, has there been change? Let's not be anecdotal about it. Let's really take a data-driven approach to whether there's any benefit to having more women in funds management and whether it might be possible to achieve a greater level of diversity in our industry. So with that backdrop, I'd like to get your response to a live poll question. And we're not going to look at the responses right away, so feel free to respond at any point during the presentation. But the question is really how much you agree or disagree with the statement, including women in key decisions will drive better business outcomes. So, you know, it's a loaded question, and I really don't expect you to answer it positively just because I'm standing up here talking about this. I'm genuinely interested in how you feel on this topic. So as you give that some thought, we'll come back to it at the end of the 10-minute session. I wanted to tell you a little story. So this is actually a story about a man and his son who are driving along in a car. You may have heard this one, but I'm hoping most of you haven't heard it before, even though my 10-year-old son was familiar with it. So anyway, so this man and his son are driving along in a car, and they very unfortunately get into a pretty bad car accident. And the father is in no state to do anything. He's rushed to hospital, and his son is actually rushed to a different hospital, and they take him into immediate surgery. And the doctor takes one look, the surgeon takes one look and says, "I'm sorry, I can't operate. That boy is my son." So how can that be? Well, the reason it can be is actually because the surgeon is his mother. So if it took you a minute to get there, that is actually what is called unconscious bias. And we all suffer from it. I mean, I am completely serious as a woman when I tell you that when my own son told me this story originally, I couldn't figure it out. I was like, I don't know. How could it be? It can't be his father. Because you just assume, you make assumptions in your brain, and we all do it. And so this is not a presentation really about what, about whether women are better than men or whether, we as mainly men in the room need to change something about our own brains. This is something that we all need to change about the way we think about different problems and the way we consider things that are called unconscious bias. So the reason why I think you should care about this topic is because all of the research that I've come across, well, I shouldn't say all, the preponderance of evidence that I have been able to find out there indicates that including more diversity in our decision making, whether it's women, minorities, people of color, no matter how you define diversity, we're mainly going to talk about women today, but this definitely holds true, diversity is better for business, and it's also better for your clients. So a couple of data points on that. First of all, we have actually come across some research that indicates that over a decade, companies with more women leaders have 3.9% excess return over companies that do not have women in leadership roles. And for companies that have women on their boards, they see a 19% higher ROE on average. That's pretty compelling evidence. Now, this is just a very small sample of a lot of data out there on the topic. I think a lot of people are trying to put more effort into understanding what is the business case for diversity. Is there a reason why we should have more women on our leadership teams? We should have more women on our research teams. So a couple of other points on this, on why I believe diversity is better for clients, is that there's a great book out there by a man named Scott Page called The Difference, where he basically spends 300 pages proving that cognitive diversity leads to better decision making. And I think that's something that when we all take a step back and think about, we can certainly appreciate. When you think about the different perspectives of the people on your team and how they bring different points of view and how that leads to better outcomes than everybody kind of thinking about a problem in the same way, it's very intuitively obvious. But if you're interested in the data, Scott Page does a great job of laying that all out. And then also, Morningstar put out a study in 2015 that shows that diverse teams have better investment performance than either gender individually. So as I said before, this is not about women versus men. It's much more about how we can collaborate together to create diverse teams that lead to better investment returns for all of our clients. So unfortunately, as an industry, we have a problem. And I'm sure you already knew that, but we did put out a study in 2016 that really examined the extent of our problem. And so what we did is we took a look at how many women were CFA charter holders versus doctors and lawyers. And then because we're Morningstar, we also put together a very in-depth study of actually over 30,000 fund managers around the world to look at whether fund managers were women or men. Now, I will tell you we had to exclude a couple of countries from this study because the way we did it is that we used statistics to be able to estimate based on first name whether someone was a man or a woman, because that's actually not a data point that we collect. So, so when we did that, these are estimates, of course, but I think we're pretty close in the ballpark. We found that in Australia and New Zealand, even though there's actually 16% of CFA charter holders that are women, 11% of fund managers are women. That does not put us in poor company. You can see that if you look across other countries as examples up there, I'll take the United States, 10% of fund managers are women. And the study that we put out in 2015 actually showed that about 3% of US assets are run by women-led teams. So it's a pretty bleak state of affairs, even though we have actually gotten much further in regard to some other professions like lawyers and doctors. So unfortunately also, the data has not improved much over the last decade or so. So what you can see from this chart, Australia and New Zealand is in orange, is that we have actually seen some improvement here in Australia and New Zealand. We were at about 10% in 2008, and we have improved the situation to having about 11% women today. That does contrast with most of the other countries on here. And just to use the US as another example, the US has gone from 11.4% down to 9.7% over that same time period. So hence my passion for this topic, right? It's not going to get better on its own. It hasn't been getting better on its own. So what can we do about it? Well, first of all, here's why we should do something about it. Women on investment teams make decisions differently. Now, this data is actually from a book that a woman I know named Meredith Jones wrote, and the book is hilariously called Women of the Street. But anyway, in that book, she really goes through a systematic approach to looking at how women make decisions versus men, specifically in the investment management industry. And what she found is that women have a different chemical composition than men. That is just a biological reality. And that as a result of that, women are less likely to fall into the trap of the winner's effect, where you want to keep on fighting or keep on putting money behind a bad idea, for example. Also, women tend to be more risk averse. So now that's not necessarily a good thing in investing, but what is a great thing is when you have risk averse and risk seeking behavior on the same team, then debating those issues and really getting to the right result can lead to better outcomes. Now, additionally, some of the other biological differences that Meredith studied found that women are more likely to avoid the herd, that women are more likely to make longer-term investments, and I have some data later from a Morningstar study that shows that portfolios run by women have less turnover. And so there is some data, which I find to be a little bit spurious, but I'll just share with you. There's some data that if you look at certain pockets of the market, women have outperformed men in terms of hedge funds and some retail accounts. If you look at the preponderance of evidence on that topic, though, back to my point about diversity, our Morningstar study showed that diverse portfolios lead to better outcomes. Not women-run portfolios, not men-run portfolios. So the diversity of teams really is what drives better outcomes, in our opinion. So here's just a little bit of the data from our 2016 study. This basically looks at the number of portfolios that we could find out there, and whether there's any implication if a portfolio is run by a man or woman on the amount of turnover in the portfolio. And what we found is that a woman-run portfolio is more likely to have lower turnover than a male-run portfolio, and that holds true particularly in fixed income, but also certainly in equity. Allocation, which is kind of multi-asset portfolios, there was very minimal effect. which is not surprising since those tend to be longer-term thinking portfolios anyway. So one objection I get on this topic quite often, and frankly I hear it from our own teams at Morningstar, is, well, there aren't any women. We've tried to hire women, we want to bring women on our team, but we can't find any. Well, so we took a look at that, and I'll be honest with you, globally, only 18% of CFA charter holders are women. There is not as many women in the marketplace to choose from as there are men. However, what the study that we did recently indicates is that women portfolio managers and women in the industry are actually more likely to be CFA charter holders. So I think that indicates really that women who are interested in this industry are really trying to make sure they have the credentials needed to be a part of your team. So hopefully things will continue to improve along those lines. The biggest market in the world for new CFA exam takers is China. And in China, it's the only country in the world where 50% of the people taking the exam right now are women. So we're moving in the right direction, hopefully. So I just wanted to conclude with a couple of final points, which is that I hope that you're at least compelled to think a little bit about unconscious bias, to think a little bit about diversity in your own workplaces, and also to think a little bit about your female clients. Because while I didn't go into a lot of the data on that, there's actually quite a lot of research out there that women as clients of advisors would like to be treated in a variety of different ways. And frankly, I think we can all appreciate that any incremental information we can get on our clients is helpful to making better decisions. So understanding this a little bit better, I think, can lead to better outcomes for your clients. And finally, just on the business case side of things, we'll note that women are actually expected to control half of private wealth in the United States in 2020. Now, I couldn't find a comparable statistic on Australia, but I could definitely find data that it's growing. And that does make sense if you think about it, because frankly, there is much more likely for women to outlive men. So even if you're dealing with a couple as an advisor, it's more likely that the woman will outlive the man, and you'll need to help them with their financial situation beyond the man that you might be dealing with more today. So food for thought, please. And I guess now we're going to look at the poll question. Oh, I don't know if they're going to put this up there. Oh, yes, it's up there. OK. So, that's wonderful news. So 62% of you strongly agree that we should include women in key decisions. I'm very heartened to hear that. I'm going to believe that you didn't just say that because I'm standing up here talking about this. But anyway, thanks very much for engaging on this topic.